I always start by reading the lessons for the following Sunday. So every priest that I met this week, I asked them what they thought of the readings. I got almost a universal response from all of the priests I talked to, except Doris. And that response was, I hope somebody else is preaching this Sunday. She knew she was safe. These are all difficult lessons. But I have to confess to you, Doris, don't chime in here, but I am a little off-center when it comes to some of these things. I found a very warm feeling from particularly the reading from Isaiah because it brought back memories of what was probably my favorite summer as a child. It was when I was 11 years old, going through summer. Think back, if you can, and try to remember those times. One of the things that was great about it, for instance, was that I had finally grown into my feet. And those of you who are awkward teenagers or awkward preteens know exactly what I mean. My coordination had finally caught up to my greatest desires. When I threw a baseball, it actually went where I aimed all the time. On top of that, the sort of innate clumsiness that I had inherited from my mother seemed to disappear. And so I thought it was going to be one of those wonderful times, and it was. One of the things that I discovered that summer, we lived next to across the alley from a large barn. Believe it or not, in the city there was a barn. The barn was mostly abandoned, but it wasn't the barn that was interesting. That summer, we discovered, a group of us discovered growing behind the barn wild grapes. As for being inquisitive 11-year-olds, we first of all tasted them. I can testify to you don't want to eat wild grapes. They have a most unusual pungent effect on the human life. But all wasn't lost. We also discovered that wild grapes make perfect missiles be hurled at one another. And there's a reason. Those of you who remember being 11, one of the problems with hurling missiles at one another was that nobody would ever tell the truth. I hit you. No, you didn't. You missed by a mile. Oh, yes, I did. No, you didn't. The reality was that when you threw ripe wild grapes, they left a smell that was totally unmistakable. Now, as you know, 11-year-old boys aren't exactly given to dating, but this would actually make an 11-year-old go take a bath. They smell it so bad. I tell you that story because, interestingly enough, in the poetic section from Isaiah, which we read today, the center of this section was God's comment that I expected grapes, and you gave me wild grapes. Because that's not what it says. The Hebrew word that we translate as wild, guess what? It's properly translated as stinky. So God is saying, I expected sweet, wonderful grapes, and you gave me stinky grapes. You can imagine his disappointment. This is not a love poem. No offense to the commentator who wrote that. It'd be nice if you could actually read a book about this passage is saying. This is a lament. God is lamenting his own sense of loss. He has called these people together. He brought them out of the land of Egypt. He gave them the land of promise. He oversaw and protected them. In other words, they were his vision. That he loved, tended, and cared for them. And he asked only one thing, that they produce a healthy crop. Sweet, edible grapes. And what did they give him? Sticky grapes. Sticky grapes. ignored it. I have times when I resisted. The vineyard is a place to come. The question becomes, what is the good news in all this? Where's the good news? God says in his lament, I think I'm done with this vineyard. We're going to knock down its walls. We're going to dig up its roots. We're going to let the animals run over it and eat the remains. You can feel God's pain. The good news is, go ahead. The good news is, what did God actually do with his people? Did God ever abandon the people of Israel? Did God ever call down lightning? Any of that, even to this day? God is good. They've had lots of moments where they were stinky grapes. Read their history. They even call themselves a stiff-necked people. Stubborn, uncooperative, self-centered. Sound familiar? The good news is that as stinky as we might be from time to time, God never abandons us. No matter how bad it gets, God never burns down the vineyard. No matter how awful we might be, how unproductive, uncooperative, on everything else, God sings a love song, calling us home to that relationship that created the vineyard in the first place. That undying, fundamental act of love of God for his people. Yeah, we're wild grapes occasionally. Some of us more frequently than others. You know who you are. God is there. God does not walk away from us. He always walks towards us. See, that's the end result of the parable, the poem of the vineyard. Is that the vineyard still goes on. The vineyard still grows. And our hope is that the vineyard will still give grapes that make sweet, wonderful wine. That's us, folks. God wants us to make sweet, wonderful wine to share with everyone around us. You don't even know that they're grapes. It's his call to us. He calls us because he loves us. So I hope we can all live in a way that our lives represent that sweetness. Because that's the one thing God asks of us. Is simply bring the sweetness of his love